This story has been exhausting. It all started, innocently enough, with an Ask Aubrey post. I discovered Aubrey on Twitter and decided to follow her on Instagram in case Twitter died. One morning, I was scrolling through Instagram, as one does, and came upon this post she shared as a screenshot. The post read, "The Andrew Tates of the world would not exist if men weren't demoralized, degraded, and confused about what masculinity is and isn't. Thanks, feminists, for the absolute show you created." Audrey captioned this by saying, "The mental gymnastics these dudes do in order to lift accountability off other men." The man who wrote this was one Joseph Massey, a poet, and this was posted on his Twitter, so I ran over to see two things. Number one, is it still up? Now, when I get screenshots from other people, normally I double check. In Aubrey's case, I don't have to, because this is what she does, and I think her credibility would be shot if what she posted was faked. I do know that sometimes controversial posts like these are deleted by their authors. Number two, is this a bad take or a one-off? Or is this Mr. Massey one of those men who tend to blame women for all that is wrong with the world? And boy, did I go down a rabbit hole on this one. Now, once I realized what was happening, I decided to share with you my discovery process, where we start with his Twitter, then go ahead and click on his pinned tweet. Let's take a look. According to his, quote, letter to the canceled, end quote, this was the era of the Me Too movement, and the poetry world was ripe for a scandal of their own. Now, I don't think that the average male in the US was expecting to be involved in something that seemed to stem from the entertainment capital of the world, aka Hollywood, but I could be wrong. In his version of the events, some statements were made in an anonymous page shared by an ex-lover of his. As we will see later, this is not exactly how it all went down, but I pause here to mention that he specifically says that back in 2018, he was teaching at a college part-time. This will become relevant later. He then goes on to explain how a mob contacted everyone he knew and basically gave them ultimatums that if they published his work, they would be considered guilty by association. He had used meditation to control a panic disorder, which apparently came back with a vengeance. His mental health disorders will make several appearances in his story. Keep that in mind. This is the first time he mentions an article he wrote for the Quillette, which, wouldn't you know it, is behind a subscription. Because nothing says taking accountability like asking people to subscribe for the pleasure of reading your apology. I wonder if it is the equivalent of a gray hoodie apology. I hate giving him my email though. Anyway, let's move on. Keep in mind, this article is his advice to others going through a cancellation. So your world is falling apart, your friends want to stay private and avoid going down with you, your anxiety is peaking, so what do? Breathe. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, his advice is mindful meditation and breathing. Do I hate the advice? No. Do I think it is either oversimplistic or he is not really going through as much of a hard time as he claims to be? Maybe. Now, I'm going to quote him directly here because I don't want to make a mistake on this particular piece of advice. After telling people that essentially boils down to go outside and touch grass, he is adamant that you must practice breathing techniques and then, and I quote, panic and anxiety can be quelled by deep breathing. It works more efficiently than any drug, prescribed or otherwise. Now, this man just stated that he considered all exit strategies, including the big exit. And if you are not new here, you know how I feel about medications. If you're new, hi, I'm Roxana, and I hate medications. So when I tell you that this is incredibly irresponsible advice, I don't think I'm being strong enough. Panic and anxiety, depending on the level, might be soothed by breathing exercises. If you, however, are having thoughts of ending things, chances are you are better off by seeking help from a mental health professional. Among all the very, shall I say, guru mentality advice he gives, there is one I absolutely agree with. Well, technically two. No matter how bad things are, if you're a creator, keep creating. When I went through hell in my online life, I froze and stopped, and I nearly stopped creating permanently. So I definitely understand this advice and I completely agree with it. He also said not to confront toxicity with toxicity. Yeah, I have to agree with that as well. I caved in and gave them my email. I mean, it was free. I hate giving them my email, but I really wanted to know what were the original thoughts on his situation. You know, that Quillette article. Within the first two paragraphs, he has both admitted to many mistakes and blamed it on being in his 20s. He spent his 20s and 30s drinking in all poetry events as basically self-medication against anxiety. That seems to be corroborated by an article called something like The Poet Joseph Massey's Disturbing History or Abuse or something to that effect. That is where we read the counterpoints to everything he's saying in both essays as well as his interviews. We hear from the women, detailing everything from uncomfortable exchanges to actually assaulting a woman in a crowded room. He does not deny any of the accusations. He actually admits them, and then he blames his mental health and how he used alcohol to placate his anxiety. The author, Rebecca Kirkman, was very thorough and not only interviewed the woman accusing him, she also interviewed Massey. His admissions on this article make his interviews contradictory. Back to his essay. At 35, he started participating in both AA and a group called Ananda to learn breathing techniques and meditation. He believes those steps of sobriety and tackling his anxiety through breathing techniques helped him create his best work and turn his life around. He then goes back in time to a very abusive childhood, which I will not repeat here. All I will say is that it definitely left a mark and might also explain his thoughts on women. He continues by basically doxing the unknown married woman he was having an affair with and basically claiming that everything she said about him was a lie. But he admitted in the first paragraph that he had been horrible and continued later on claiming that he behaved badly against both women and men. Even better, both on an interview and in writing, he alleged that the poetry world had escaped the Me Too movement. But then he stated, while describing his reaction to bowing out of a poetry competition, that he went online to vent his feelings, and I quote, "In a panic, I posted about my feelings on Facebook, explaining to my friends that I was being smeared by an unnamed, quote, married woman, end quote, with whom I'd had an affair. I also described my plan to drop out of the poetry world, having seen what happened to other poets who were, quote, called out, end quote." His math ain't mathing either. He says he started rehab at 35 and then moved to California, and then says he spent 12 years in California, but he's around 42. 35 plus 12 is 47? Maybe his memories are fuzzy. I'm aware that can happen to people in recovery. The point is that even if his affair was a misunderstanding between two temperamental poets, there are well over a dozen other women who have talked about their encounters with him, even though he blames this female poet as the sole source of his Me Too cancellation. In fact, in the article I mentioned earlier, Rebecca Kirkman was able to confirm more than 7 stories on the record. He stated at first that the poetry world had escaped the Me Too accusations, but we just read where he said he knew what happened to other poets when they were called out. He said that he was a nobody, that he didn't understand why they were coming for him because he was not a professor or anything like that. But on the essays, he explains that he was teaching at a college at the time that this all came down. He blamed the alcohol for his behavior, but then blamed the married woman for his cancellation. Okay. Another interesting resource is an interview he did with Ines Stepman for his podcast High Noon. I could spend an entire video on her anti-feminist, transphobic post, but I will only state here that the entire interview was a PR piece on his redemption arc, where she blamed the victims while claiming that he was the victim because he was forced to write the essay I spoke about a minute ago. Except, nobody asked him to write anything. And for someone who considers himself an austere poet, he sure can go around and write way too much to make a point. Now, two things came to mind while reading both of his essays. Number one, some people who investigate things for a living will tell you that they are always suspicious of people who give too many details. And number two, everything is a function of his abusive upbringing and his mental health issues. The thing about 12-step programs is you're supposed to take accountability for your mistakes. And I want to take a minute on this right now. I am neither a psychologist or a mental health expert on any mental health but my own. I am surrounded by people who participate or have participated in 12-step programs, from alcohol, drug abuse, and even gambling addictions. In order to make my point, I searched the list of the 12 steps from the original source, AA, aka Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything from number 4 down involves making an inventory of your wrongdoings and taking accountability, making amends when possible, etc. And here we get into the sticky point of accountability. According to Merriam-Webster, the definition of accountability is the quality or state of being accountable. Especially an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. Now, I remember when I was a kid, teachers would hate it if we used any version of the word to define the same word. You know, if I'm looking for accountability and the version of Merriam-Webster says being accountable or to account, yeah, that would have not gone well in my school, but I digress. Now, the definition of accountable is subject to giving an account, answerable, and the second definition says capable of being explained. Now, let's go back to the original definition. See where it says the obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or account for one's actions? Yeah, that's where I want to stop and reflect for a minute. It is baffling to me the amount of people in the public eye who have been very open about their struggles and recovery, have participated in 12-step programs, and yet have such a strange relationship with accountability. It's almost as if they think their version of accountability is malleable and can be adjusted to their life. Massey wrote 2 essays where he essentially starts by saying he did horrible things and said horrible things to both men and women, and then goes on to High Noon, a podcast with Ines Stepman, and basically blames a woman for what he calls a systematic takedown. Most celebrities will issue a blanket apology with many generalizations, and we assume it is because they don't remember every little detail of every drunken night or every instance while being high. The truth, though, when you sit back and listen to them, is that to them, that blanket apology is the equivalent of taking accountability. If you're going to take accountability, like the 12-step programs say, it's an all or nothing endeavor. I understand that due to the nature of the addiction, this person will not remember every wrongdoing. But from that to claim that because he barely knows the person, it couldn't have happened, no, that's not accountability. I also want to address Mr. Massey's obsession with the terms woke and canceled because they are related to people like him. People ask me all the time why I don't believe in cancellations. The truth is, for every person who believes a person did something wrong, you will find another person that will still support them because they don't believe them to be bad. Also, let's be clear, cancellations are not new. If you don't believe me, ask Martha Stewart, Oprah Winfrey, or Dan Rather. Each of these people did or said something that cost them dearly. Stewart was accused and convicted of insider trading. Mind you, I think she was used as an example. As we all know, Congress is full of people with investments in corporations where their law creation is absolutely suspect. Oprah made a statement about meat and was sued for it. Dan Rather made a statement about a politician and derailed his entire career. What do all these people have in common? They have recovered and have more adoring fans and opportunities now than when they did the thing. Oh, one example where it did not go as well, the Dixie Chicks, now known as just the Chicks. Look it up. They did recover, and depending on who you ask, were vindicated. So, what is the definition of canceled? To dismiss something or someone, according to the Urban Dictionary, to reject an individual or an idea. Now, it is often used to make someone irrelevant by pointing out what they did wrong. Funny enough, the injured party has a habit of claiming cancellation when they are asked to take accountability. Which leads me to their interpretation of woke, and sometimes the woke mob. To people like Mr. Massey, being woke is basically the same as coming for people to cancel them. Woke is supposed to be an insult. As recent events have proved, nobody who uses that word as a pejorative knows what it means. So, for your benefit, let's define it according to the dictionary. Let's take a look at Merriam-Webster. Woke, aware of and actively attentive to important societal facts and issues, especially issues of racial and social justice. You will notice any person on social media who claims that the woke are coming after them has no clue that woke is a term that defines the importance of being attentive to social issues, especially those issues of race and social justice. And I think they just hang on to the social justice part and how much it affects them personally. And because of that, they assume that the woke mob is going to cancel them. Now, that's my theory. The reality is that every movement in history has had moments where some will take advantage of it to impose their own agenda. And thus, it is important that every person stays alert to the real issues and the ways in which to fix them. But a man who self admittedly has awkward encounters with women finds his little escapades are not bad enough to be made a target of the Me Too movement. His need for accountability does not take into consideration the need of women to be heard and say where he went wrong. Instead of doing some introspection into the patterns that might have led him to that moment, he decided to do some breathing exercises and meditation and continue working without explaining or excusing himself because it will all die down eventually. And where did I get those ideas? From hitting his own. Why did I just say hitting? From reading his own words and watching him on the High Noon podcast. So now let's look at the posts on social media and what I think they reflect, shall we? Quoting Michael G. McNeil, who said, "Let's get real here. As an art form, poetry is as dead as Judas Iscariote. As is sculpture, mainstream literature, serious music, painting, etc. And cinema is headed towards that direction." And his answer was, "Poetry is dead in the MFA creative writing programs and in the hands of woke politics. But there are still serious poets practicing their art at a high level. Poetry is a human art. It won't ever die," quotes, "but it could use some life support." Now, I am not going to sit here and show you the poems or read you the poems. I have them and I was considering doing that. But to me, the more important issue is this whole idea that a person will escape accountability under certain circumstances, like this man did. And so I'm not going to get into how he treats the art of writing poetry. Now, keep in mind that I mentioned in the beginning of this video that he writes very, what's the word I want to use? The name of the style is austere, and what it means is that he doesn't use a lot of words to convey a meaning, and I'm not a fan, and I don't see what other people see. I read several people who were critiquing his work, and I really don't see what they see when I read what he wrote. So I'm not going to comment on whether or not it's good art or not. I will say this. Poetry has been dying, quote unquote, for decades. I remember when I was still in college, and that was like over 25 years ago. And people were talking about how nobody wanted to write poetry anymore. How poetry books didn't sell. As far back as 10 years ago, I heard the same thing. Whenever a poetry book actually makes it into the top 10 list or whatever, it's a big deal. Because most people don't like to sit and read a poetry book. Ironically, it's one of the most entertaining things to do for you to sit and read a good poetry, but it has to be a good poetry book. And it has to be something that speaks to you. I will say this. I mentioned in the beginning of the video how this man is obsessed with the word woke and what he understands woke to mean. And nowhere is it more apparent that he doesn't know what it actually means than in this particular statement that he made. This is a more transparent example of what I mean. He says, the politics expressed in this terrible poem have overtaken American poetry to such an extent that the quality of the writing no longer matters. Craft is discarded to accommodate the woke chokehold killing the arts from within, i.e. academia. It's a problem. And he's quote tweeting a Christopher F. Rufo who says, UConn professor Trace Peterson reveals everything you need to know about queer theory in this atrocious poem, Everyone is a Little Trans. Modern universities have substituted identity for scholarship, and taxpayers are subsidizing it. Now, it is very clear to see that the actual problem with this is the identity of the poet writer. I don't know if the poem itself is good or not. Here's the thing with art, and this is a problem that I've seen both in visual arts as well as written poetry and music and that sort of thing. Art is in the eye of a beholder. That's an expression for a reason, okay? I'm gonna give you a very simple example. If you know who Picasso is, to some people, Picasso is just throwing paint in a canvas and selling it as high art, okay? Ironically, I remember at one point in my life when I was studying art history, thinking to myself, I wonder if he's punking the entire industry. Because art has become this entire thing, for lack of a better word, where only the most rich think that they know what art is. And where people automatically assume the meaning of something based on their experience. And the reality is that good art, regardless of whether it's a very expensive painting, or if you go to a museum, or if you're just looking at something beautiful in nature, real art is what speaks to you. And it's as individual as we are. For example, I read some of this guy's poems, and again, I don't get it. I really don't get it. And I'm one of those people that with the right sequence of notes, you can pull tears out of me. You sing to me any version of It's a Wonderful World, and I will be bawling my eyes out. But I read this guy's poem, and I had no reaction whatsoever. Why? Because every form of art is as individual as the person observing, reading, singing, whatever. And so it is very clear from this post and from his reaction to the post that their actual problem of both these people is that a trans woman wrote a poem claiming that everybody's a little trans and they have a problem. That's all there is. And it's really sad, to be honest with you, that this is what they're talking about woke. That the fact that identity politics have taken over the universities and that's what make them woke. Which is, I don't know, to me it's an oversimplification, especially when, yes, it is social justice to treat trans people as people because they deserve to be treated as people because they are. I don't know why that's so hard to understand. But most people, when they're talking about woke, they're talking more about racial issues. And yes, there are a lot of trans women involved in that because there's a lot of black trans women that are very hurt by this type of mentality. But that's not where they're going with this. And that's what aggravates me about this whole situation. I'm gonna read only one more because I can feel my blood pressure rising, and I wanted to take the time with the one that caused the inspiration to strike on this entire video. And it is the following. The Andrew Tates of the world would not exist if men weren't demoralized, degraded, and confused about what masculinity is and isn't. Thanks, feminists, for the absolute show you created. Now, before I tell you my opinion on that particular comment, I am going to read you a tweet that I wrote that is related to this. So, I'm telling my daughter about the story I'm working on and how a certain type of men will blame women for their undoing. She says, I love how men always blame the women. I'm sorry your dick shriveled up so much that you can't figure out how to use it. Yes, this is my DNA. Speaking to hubby about this particular topic, he said, if a man needs a woman to tell him what is and isn't masculinity, he already lost. Here's the thing. Those are the opinions of the two people closest to me. And here's the thing. There's so much wrong with this particular comment. And Aubrey said the mental gymnastics these dudes do in order to lift accountability off other men. Because clearly this is about making Andrew Tate right no matter what. Andrew Tate is currently accused of a lot of crimes involving, how do I say this, trafficking of humans. And so there's a lot more wrong with Andrew Tate than just the fact that she spills all this crap about how men are men and blah, blah, blah. Now, we have a serious problem in this country, which is very obvious whenever somebody mentions Andrew Tate. The amount of men that are willing to put their life on the line, their reputation on the line to defend a man that is basically taking men back to cave years. And actually, I think that's disrespectful to cavemen because cavemen tended to respect their women a lot more than we've led to believe. But here's the thing. Whether it's because people assume that their religious beliefs claim that this is the way to treat a woman, or it's because I'm a man and you're supposed to do whatever I want, all of them are wrong. Now, Joseph Massey converted to Catholicism not too long ago after this whole scandal with the Me Too movement. And I was a Catholic for 40-something years, maybe 50-something years. I don't know. I left a few years ago. But in my head, I left a lot sooner than that. And the reality is this. I have never, in my entire life in the Catholic Church, been led to believe that men are better or more important than women. Yes, there is a little line in when you say your vows, but you can change that line now. That was the line that was in the time before. But if you actually pay attention to the line is set the same way whether you're a man or a woman. And it's the whole thing of the love, cherish, and obey, or whatever it was. We didn't use obey, so I don't remember what the whole thing is. But the bottom line is this. Nowhere in the Bible are women treated as horribly as they're treated now by men using the Bible. And that is not to say that the Bible doesn't have some horrible, horrible ideas on how to treat women. There is. But they also have a lot of parts where they treat women like the goddesses that we are. And so to hear this man talking about how to treat women and see how many men follow blindly a man that obviously has no game, no ability. And then you have this man right here, Mr. Massey, who clearly, and by his own words, says that he is very awkward when it comes to relationships with women. He's defending Andrew Tate on something that is indefensible at the end of the day. Because here's the thing. What makes you a man? I don't know how many times I'm going to have to explain this, but what makes you a man is not what you have between your legs, or how much money you bring into the home, or how much you can carry. You know, what makes you a man is your ability to deal with situations, your ability to take care of your people, whether they're your wife, your kids, or your fellow male friends. It has absolutely nothing to do with sex at all. And this whole idea that woman does whatever I say. I've been married for 35 years, okay? I have yet, and we've had moments when my husband has tried to play that game with me, and even if it's jokingly, it hasn't gone well for him. Why? Because that's not the game we decided to play when we started dating 37 years ago. From the moment I met this man, I told him, I'm going to do whatever I want to do. I'm obviously going to ask you for your opinion, but at the end of the day, the decision is mine. It is what it is. But the same thing goes for him. He can make his own decisions. Do I hope that he makes a decision based on what we have discussed? Absolutely. But I'm pretty sure he feels the same way about me. That doesn't mean that we're always going to do whatever the other one says. Why? Because we know exactly how we feel about the situation at hand. And I just don't understand. Listen, I understand that you want to get advice from somebody that has game and somebody that knows what they're doing. But how many times have you seen Andrew Tate in a stable relationship with a woman? Because I have yet to see that. He obviously doesn't know how to behave around women. Greta is what, 19? And she absolutely demolished him on Twitter. And of course, now they're calling her racist because he's half black. No, I'm sorry. If you behave badly, it doesn't matter what color, what gender. It doesn't really matter who you are. If you behave badly and you're a bad example for people, it's allowed for you to be taken down. Whether it's a 19-year-old white girl or a 50-year-old black male or the police or whoever, okay? There is no excuse for the bad behavior this man is showing, and there is definitely no excuse for people to follow him. But at the end of the day, we're talking about Mr. Massey, and one more example of a man who is clearly confused, who based on his own history and his own telling of his own history, and I'm giving you every single resource I used to create this compilation of information. I'm giving you every single resource so you can read for yourself how bad this guy's history is. And I'm not talking about his own mistreatment of women. I'm talking about how he was raised. And because at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter if he was abused or not. What matters is how he feels about what happened to him. This is a man that is clearly not comfortable in his own skin, is clearly unsure of the relationships with women based on his relationship with his grandma, whom he loved. And at the same time, when you read what happened, you sit there and you go, he really hates her. And that whole dichotomy is what has created this entire lifelong behavioral problem. And instead of facing that head on, because, it's one thing when somebody is not aware of the circumstances that created the person that they are today, but clearly he knows what the challenges were, because he's the one telling us what the challenges were when he was growing up and how he overcame those. But clearly, he's not overcoming them in a positive way, and he thinks he is. I feel very sorry for this man because clearly he's never going to have a very satisfying relationship so long as his role models are people like Tate. And here he is, 6 years after the Me Too movement so-called canceled him, and he still doesn't get it. He still thinks that he did nothing wrong because it was the alcohol, and it was the mental health problems, and it was the lack of breathing. I'm being sarcastic, but you know what I'm trying to say. No, you still need to do some introspection and realize that at the core of this entire situation, the only thing that is actually hampering your progress and your success is you and your behaviors. I can't wait to see what you guys have to say about this. I can't wait. Let's see the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons who allowed this to be my outlet for expressing myself. And you'll have a beautiful day. Bye.